A human's touch made the cold alien assassin burn with desire. Now she can't kill him. The cold of deep space was nothing compared to the chill in Vena's heart. She had trained since infancy to be an elite assassin, her people's silent blade in the dark. Her latest mission was simple: eliminate the human diplomat before his trade negotiations with the Gilleri Council could shift the balance of power. Humans were dangerous, unpredictable, and growing too influential. The elders had deemed his elimination necessary, and Vena had never failed a mission before. Perched in the rafters of the Grand Gilleri Hall, she watched the target below. The human ambassador Ilias Carter stood at the negotiating table, his hands moving expressively as he spoke. His species was known for their peculiar ability to charm with words alone. It disgusted her. Words were a weapon she had no use for. She had been taught that humans were weak, fragile things, biological accidents who had survived on luck more than merit. And yet, they had expanded rapidly across the stars, adapting to environments even her kind avoided. They were dangerous precisely because they weren't bound by the same rigid traditions as the Gilleri or the Dominion she served. Vena flexed her fingers, feeling the pressure of her hidden blade against her palm. One precise strike, a clean kill, and she could vanish into the shadows as if she had never been there. It was what she did best. Her muscles tensed as Carter shifted, giving her the perfect opening. She exhaled slowly and sprang from the rafters, her descent as silent as death itself. But the moment her blade reached his throat, something went wrong. A jolt of unexpected sensation shot through her body, unlike anything she had ever felt before. His skin was warm beneath her fingertips, radiating a heat that sent a shiver through her nerves. Her mind, trained for discipline and execution, faltered for a fraction of a second. A fraction too long. In that instant, Carter moved. He was fast. Too fast for a man who was supposed to be nothing more than a diplomat. He twisted his body just enough to break her grip and sent them both tumbling to the floor. Vena's instincts kicked in, her body adjusting midair to land on top of him, her knife pressed against his exposed throat. But she was shaking. Her heartbeat was erratic, pounding in her ears like a war drum. It wasn't assassins did not fear. It was something else entirely, something she didn't understand. Carter didn't struggle. He lay beneath her, his emerald green eyes fixed on hers with an unreadable expression. He was studying her, assessing her, but there was no terror in his gaze. No panic. That was the second thing that went wrong. Why wasn't he afraid? Every species knew to fear the touch of a Gilleri assassin. A single graze from her venom-laced blade could end even the mightiest warriors in seconds. And yet, this human, this frustratingly warm, infuriatingly calm human was looking at her with something that resembled curiosity rather than dread. "You're hesitating," he said, his voice steady. "Why?" She snarled, pressing the blade harder against his skin. A single twitch and it would be over. She had never hesitated before. "Why now?" "Kill me if you must," Carter continued. "But you should know I understand what it's like to be used as a weapon." Vena froze. The word struck something deep inside her, a buried part of herself she had long since ignored. He knew. No, that was impossible. He was a diplomat, not a soldier. He couldn't possibly understand the life she had lived, the endless conditioning, the cold, unfeeling expectations of her masters. And yet, something in his voice rang true. "You don't know anything about me," she hissed, but the conviction in her tone wavered. Carter tilted his head slightly, the corner of his mouth lifting in something almost like amusement. "I know you're still holding back. If you weren't, I'd be dead already." Her grip tightened on the hilt of her knife. She willed her fingers to move to complete the mission, but instead they trembled against his skin. The warmth beneath her palm burned through her, lighting a fire in her veins that no training had prepared her for. She had spent years in the void of space, in the cold of the assassin's path. She was not made for warmth. And yet, she could feel his pulse beneath her fingers, steady and unwavering. Something inside her cracked. She had been sent to kill this man, but right now, with his life in her hands, she realized the most terrifying truth of all. She didn't want to. The sound of approaching guards broke the moment. Voices shouted in alarm. Footsteps pounded against the polished floors of the Grand Hall. The Gilleri security forces had finally noticed the commotion. Vena's instincts screamed at her to run. Assassins were shadows, never to be caught, never to be seen. But for the first time in her life, she hesitated. Carter saw it. He seized the opportunity, shifting just enough to press his hand over hers. Not in struggle, not in combat, but in something softer. "Come with me," he said. The words sent another jolt through her, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something dangerously close to temptation. She had no allies, no home beyond the mission. If she failed, her people would erase her existence as if she had never been born. She had been prepared for that. But what she wasn't prepared for was the choice he was offering her now. The guards were almost upon them. If she ran, she could disappear into the shadows as she always had. If she stayed, she would be hunted, seen as a failure, a traitor. And yet for the first time, she wasn't certain she wanted to disappear. Carter's eyes held hers unwavering. He wasn't afraid of her. He wasn't trying to fight her. He was offering something else entirely. Freedom. Her grip on the knife loosened. And when the moment came when the guards finally stormed into the hall, Vina made her decision. She grabbed Carter by the wrist, yanked him to his feet, and ran. Because for the first time in her life, she wanted something more than the mission. She wanted to know what it felt like to burn the cold, calculated assassin known as Zira found herself entangled in emotions she had long suppressed. The heat of the human's touch had sent shivers through her, awakening something primal within her that she had never encountered before. She sat on the edge of the cot in the dimly lit hideout, her fingers twitching as she tried to process everything that had happened. Dane, the human mercenary who had unknowingly saved her, moved with a cautious ease, his body language calm yet guarded. He had sensed the shift in her demeanor, the way her once steely eyes now flickered with uncertainty. It wasn't fear. Shara didn't know fear. But there was something else. Something unfamiliar that made her heart pound against her ribs like a war drum. "Are you sure you're all right?" Dane asked, crouching down a few feet away from her, his gaze studying her like one might a dangerous animal. He was still wary of her, and he had every reason to be. After all, she had been sent to kill him. "I don't know," Sarah admitted, the words foreign on her tongue. It was the first time in her life she had ever said them. She had always known exactly what she was doing, what her purpose was. But now everything felt uncertain. She could still feel the warmth of his touch from earlier, the way his hands had steadied her when she had faltered. It was such a simple thing, so insignificant in the grand scheme of the universe, and yet it had shattered the foundation of her existence. Dane ran a hand through his dark hair, exhaling slowly. "You don't seem like someone who usually doubts themselves." "I don't," she replied, staring down at her gloved hands. "But I also don't usually let my targets live." Dane let out a dry chuckle. "Well, I appreciate the change of pace." A small, amused smirk tugged at the corner of Zira's lips before she quickly wiped it away. She wasn't supposed to be amused. She wasn't supposed to feel warmth in the presence of a human. Her people had drilled it into her head since birth. Humans were weak, emotional creatures. Their emotions made them unpredictable, dangerous even. And yet, here she was, thrown into a storm of emotions because of one. Dane stood up and grabbed a bottle of water from the crate beside him, tossing it toward her. She caught it without thinking, her reflexes automatic. "Drink," he said. "You lost a lot of blood." Shira hesitated before unscrewing the cap and taking a slow sip. The cool liquid soothed her dry throat, but it didn't do anything to quell the fire burning inside her. She stole a glance at Dane, his strong frame silhouetted by the dim emergency lights. There was something about him, something she had never encountered in any of her past targets. "I don't understand you," she finally admitted. Dane arched a brow. "What's there to understand? You should be dead," she said bluntly. "I should have killed you. And yet here we are." She narrowed her eyes at him. "Why aren't you afraid of me?" Dane leaned against the wall, arms crossed over his chest. "Because I don't think you want to kill me anymore." The words struck her like a physical blow. She wanted to deny them, to tell him that she was still the assassin, the warrior bred to end lives without hesitation. But she couldn't, because deep down she knew he was right. She set the water bottle down and exhaled sharply. "If my people find out I failed my mission, they will send others to finish the job. And not just for you, they'll come for me too." Dane's expression darkened. "Then we make sure that doesn't happen, Ba." Sira scoffed. "You don't understand. The Syndicate doesn't tolerate failure. There's nowhere I can hide, nowhere you can hide." Dane pushed off the wall and stepped closer, his presence overwhelming yet strangely comforting. "Then we stop running." She blinked up at him, her breath hitching. "You're insane." He smirked. "I prefer resourceful." For a moment, she just stared at him, trying to comprehend his unwavering confidence. Humans were supposed to be weak, but there was nothing weak about Dane. He faced the impossible with a smirk and a plan, and for the first time in her life, Sira found herself wanting to believe in something other than cold, ruthless efficiency. A part of her whispered that it was foolish, that she was letting sentiment cloud her judgment. But another part, the part that had trembled under his touch, wanted to see where this would lead. She rose to her feet, standing toe to toe with him. "If we do this, there's no going back." Dane met her gaze with unwavering resolve. "Then we go forward." Gazira swallowed hard. She had spent her entire life walking a path carved in blood, a path that had led her to this moment. And for the first time, she was about to step off that path and into the unknown. Her fingers twitched at her sides before she finally reached out, grasping his hand in hers. It was a silent agreement, a fragile yet unbreakable truce. And just like that, the assassin was no longer alone. The journey away from the syndicate was proving to be more treacherous than Zira had anticipated. Every step she took alongside Dane felt like a rebellion against everything she had ever known. She had spent her entire life in the shadows, hunting, eliminating, and disappearing without a trace. But now she was running, not from a mission, but from the people who had made her into what she was. Dane led them through the underground tunnels beneath the city, his familiarity with human back alley routes proving useful. They had evaded at least 2 scouting drones and a patrol that had undoubtedly been sent for Jara. The syndicate wasted no time in tracking down its loose ends. Sira gritted her teeth. They reached a maintenance door leading to the lower industrial sector. "They're moving fast," she muttered, glancing at the blinking red security nodes above them. "Too fast. They want this over quickly." Dane peered through the metal grates. "Can't say I blame them. A rogue assassin and the guy she failed to kill. That's not a good look for them." She gave him a sharp look. "You don't seem particularly worried." Dane smirked. "What's the point? If I start panicking, it won't change the fact that we're in deep." He turned to her, eyes scanning her face. "You still sure about this?" Shira hesitated. Was she? It would have been so easy to turn back. She knew what would happen if she returned to the syndicate. They would punish her, recondition her mind, strip away whatever weakness had led to this failure. She would be forced to forget Dane, to erase every flicker of emotion that had made her hesitate. The thought made her stomach churn. "I'm sure," she said firmly. Dane nodded and pushed open the door, leading them into a vast, dimly lit factory filled with towering machinery. The rhythmic hum of conveyor belts echoed through the space. He guided her along the catwalks, keeping to the shadows. "I have a contact," Dane said. "An old friend who might be able to get us off-world. But getting to him won't be easy." Sira crossed her arms. "Nothing ever is," Dane chuckled. "You're starting to sound like me." She rolled her eyes but didn't deny it. Something about the way he faced adversity head-on was admirable. They descended into the lower levels, slipping past security checkpoints and automated guards. Sira handled the few obstacles they encountered with ease, disabling a drone with a precise strike to its sensor, bypassing a locked door with a quick override of its access panel. Dane whistled. "You really are dangerous." Sira glanced at him. "Did you think I wasn't?" "Oh, I know you are," he said with a smirk. "But it's nice to see it up close." She wasn't sure why, but his words made her stomach tighten in a way that had nothing to do with combat. She pushed the feeling aside. They reached a transport hub, where cargo shuttles were being loaded for off-world deliveries. Dane scanned the area looking for an opening. "There," he pointed. "That fritter is heading to the outer colonies. If we can get on board, we'll be out of syndicate reach." Ira studied the ship. "It's heavily guarded." Dane smirked. "Good thing we have an expert assassin." Then, she rolled her eyes but found herself smiling. He made things sound simple even when they weren't. They moved swiftly, sticking to the blind spots of the patrolling guards. Sira took out 2 without a sound, her movements precise and fluid. Dane marveled at how effortlessly she moved, like a shadow given form. They reached the loading ramp just as the final cargo containers were being secured. Dane motioned for Sira to slip inside. She hesitated for only a moment before following. As the ship's engines roared to life, she exhaled slowly. For the first time in her life, she was leaving behind everything she had ever known. And she wasn't alone. The hum of the cargo freighter's engines vibrated through the metal floor beneath Sira's feet. She and Dane had successfully infiltrated the vessel, securing a hidden corner deep within the storage hold, surrounded by towering crates of processed minerals and industrial supplies. The darkness was thick, broken only by the occasional flicker of maintenance lights. Dane shifted beside her, resting against a steel support beam. "So," he murmured, keeping his voice low. "What's the plan once we get to the outer colonies?" Shira glanced at him. It was a question she had been avoiding. She had spent so much time planning how to escape the syndicate, but not much time thinking about what came after. Assassins didn't have futures. They existed in the present moment, carrying out missions and then fading into the next job. She exhaled slowly. "We need to disappear, change identities, find a place where the syndicate won't think to look for us." Dane smirked. "And where would that be? You know them better than I do." Shira leaned her head back against the cold metal. "Somewhere quiet. A backwater world maybe. A place they wouldn't bother sending a retrieval team." Dane let out a dry chuckle. "You don't seem like the quiet type." She turned to him, studying his face in the dim lighting. "Neither do you." He shrugged. "I could learn. Be nice to live out someone trying to kill me for once." She found herself smiling. Just a small, fleeting expression, but it was there. It felt strange, unfamiliar. The freighter jolted as it made a course adjustment, causing the crates around them to shift slightly. Dane tensed, listening for any signs that the crew had noticed something. Sierra placed a reassuring hand on his arm. "We're still secure. The ship is just adjusting its trajectory." Dane glanced down at her hand before looking back at her. "You're oddly calm for someone being hunted." She hesitated. "It's easier with you here." Dane's expression softened. "Yeah." Shira withdrew her hand quickly, suddenly feeling self-conscious. "Don't read too much into it," Dane grinned. Too late. Before she could respond, a sharp noise echoed through the cargo hold, a metallic clang, followed by the distinct sound of footsteps. Shira's body tensed instantly. They weren't alone. She pressed a finger to her lips, signaling for Dane to stay quiet. Then, with fluid grace, she melted into the shadows, moving like a ghost between the crates. Dane stayed crouched behind cover, watching as Sierra disappeared into the darkness. He trusted her instincts, but his heart pounded all the same. A beam of light swept through the cargo hold as a security officer made his rounds. His uniform bore the insignia of the freighter's shipping company. Just a standard patrolman. But if he found them, it wouldn't take much for the crew to report 2 stowaways. And if the syndicate got word, Sierra moved like a whisper, sliding behind the guard before he could react. In a single, efficient movement, she grabbed him from behind, pressing a blade against his throat. "Make a sound and you die," she whispered. The guard stiffened, his breath hitching. Shira leaned in. "Or there are others patrolling this level." The guard hesitated before shaking his head. Sierra didn't trust him. She knocked him out with a precise strike to the base of his neck, catching his body before it could hit the floor. She dragged him behind a crate and bound his hands with a cable. Dane whistled softly from his hiding spot. "Remind me never to sneak up on you." She shot him a look. "Stay focused." Dane smirked but nodded. They remained hidden for the rest of the journey, only moving when absolutely necessary. The days passed in tense silence, with only the distant hum of the ship to keep them company. But despite the danger, Shira found herself becoming comfortable. Dane's presence, his unwavering confidence, the way he cracked jokes even when they were in mortal peril. It was different from anything she had known, and different felt good. When the ship finally docked at its destination, they moved quickly. Under the cover of night, they slipped through the loading bay, blending in with the laborers and traders bustling about. The outer colony was rough, filled with drifters, smugglers, and exiles. It wasn't the safest place, but that worked in their favor. The syndicate would have a harder time tracking them here. They found a quiet outpost on the colony's outskirts, a rundown inn with few questions asked. In their small rented room, Dane sat on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair. "So, do we just live here now?" Sierra leaned against the wall, arms crossed. "For now, we lay low. Change identities." Dane chuckled. "And what, start a new life?" She hesitated. "Maybe." Dane looked up at her. "What kind of life do you want, Sierra?" The question struck something deep within her. What did she want? She had never allowed herself to think about it before. She looked at him, the man she had been sent to kill, the man who had somehow endowed years of conditioning with nothing but kindness. For the first time in her life, she wanted something more. But before she could answer, a sudden explosion rocked the building. Shira's instincts kicked in immediately. "Muv!" she shouted, grabbing Dane and pulling him down just as a section of the wall was blown apart. The air filled with dust and debris. Outside, the sound of approaching footsteps sent a cold chill down Shira's spine. The syndicate had found them, Dane cuffed, pushing himself up. "US laying low wasn't an option, huh?" Shira pulled her blade eyes narrow. "We run. We fight or we run." Dane grinned. "You already know what I'm gonna say." Shira smirked. "Then let's make them regret finding us." The first syndicate enforcers stormed, heavily armed, their armor gleaming under the dim light. Shira moved first, a blur of lethal precision. She took down the first with a strike to the throat, twisting his weapon from his grip and firing at the others. Dane wasn't far behind. He might not have been an assassin, but he was a soldier and a damn good one. He took cover, returning fire with a stolen rifle. The fight was brutal. Explosions shook the building and gunfire lit up the dark. Shira fought like a demon, her every move calculated, every strike deadly. But there were too many of them. Dane ducked behind cover, reloading. Any bright ideas? Shira scanned the battlefield, her mind racing. Then she saw it, the fuel tank stacked near the entrance. She turned to Dane. "We blow the tanks. It'll give us an opening." Dane followed her gaze and grinned. "I like the way you think." With precision, Shira threw an explosive charge toward the tanks. The blast was immediate, sending fire and shrapnel in all directions. The syndicate enforcers were thrown into chaos. Now, Syrah grabbed Dane's arm, pulling him through the flames. They ran, dodging debris, bullets whizzing past them. They didn't stop until they were deep into the colony's underbelly, far from the burning wreckage of their hideout. Dane panted, leaning against a wall. "That was insane," Syrah smirked. "You still with me?" He met her gaze, something intense in his eyes. "Always." For the first time in her life, Syrah didn't feel like an assassin. She didn't feel like a weapon. She felt free. And with Dane beside her, she wasn't afraid of whatever came next.